And now, despite his clear lack in judgment in selecting the wrong team to root for at this year's Army-Navy game, it is my privilege to introduce your next speaker. He is a warrior, having enlisted in the Navy right after high school, just days before 9/11. He served on multiple deployments in support of the global war on terror as a submariner and diver. He is a scholar, beginning his academic career at Brevard Community College while working full-time as a defense contractor in Major League Baseball's front office for the Washington Nationals. He then moved on to Florida State University, where he earned a BS, Bachelor of Science, of course, in social sciences. But he also served as a chapter leader at that SVA chapter and was also selected as the Student Veteran of the Year in 2011. He continued his scholarship, moving on to Syracuse University, while working full-time at the Institute for Veterans and Military Families, running their entrepreneurship program for disabled veterans. He also earned his master's in public administration, also teaching as an adjunct professor at the Whitman School. He is a leader, one of the most impactful leaders to emerge out of this generation of veterans. He serves as a commissioner for the American Council on Education and on the Commission for Education, Attainment, and Innovation. He was selected to serve as vice chairman for the VA Secretary David Shulkin's Veteran Advisory Council on Education. He manages to moonlight as the mascot for the University of Notre Dame Leprechaun, while serving as your SVA president and CEO for the past 2 years. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome NatCon 2018, welcome for Jared Lyons.
So before I get started, I think that from this point forward, I always must be introduced by a not only retired colonel, but Green Beret. That is the way I need to be introduced from this point forward. Colonel Howe is a man that is big on character and, like me, short on stature. But he packs a mean punch, and on behalf of a little over 1.1 million veterans in higher education, Miguel, from the bottom of my heart, on behalf of all of us in the room, I'd like to present you with our 10-year anniversary challenge coin on behalf of everyone here, and thank you very much for President and Mrs. Bush's kind words to these motivated leaders. Thank you, sir. Good morning. No. I know we can do better than that. It was a long night for some, but you're all here with bells on and ready to go. Good morning. Outstanding. Now, Miguel warmed things up a little bit, but as I mentioned last night, the first course I ever took in community college after separating from the world's finest Navy was a public speaking course. I talked to all the sailors last night. I got that squared away. And the best lesson that I ever learned in that was to get to know your audience. Now, I was backstage when Miguel sort of had folks identify themselves, but it would be helpful for me if I could have the audience sound off in any way that you feel might be appropriate. But let's try it again first and pay attention this time. Where's the United States Army? That was pretty good, Army. How about that world's finest Navy? Very good. Where's the Air Force at? Usually the Air Force is much more polite. That was well done. Now, often regarded as the smallest, but no doubt the meanest, where are my United States Marines? There's not that many of them here, but that filled the room. And never to be forgotten, but always last because we love them. Where is the United States Coast Guard? It gets bigger every year. Well done, Coast Guard. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge another group of individuals, and I'd love you to sound off. But SVA prides itself on inclusivity. Where are our family members and supporters of the United States military? Let's hear it from you. And let's all give them a round of applause for their support. My name is Jared Lyon, and I have the distinct pleasure and honor to serve as your president and CEO of Student Veterans of America at your national headquarters in Washington, D.C. Over the past 2 years, I have visited over 240 of your campuses in 48 states, and I've had the honor of meeting with many of you. But for the ones that I haven't met yet, connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to continue the conversation after this. And what's even more important is that all of you are here receiving this top-line motivation, inspiration, best practices, leading practices. But there's an awful lot of your brothers and sisters in arms that are back on campus that couldn't make the journey. And so for that reason, and for the first year at NatCon, you might notice that we're streaming all of our general sessions via Facebook. So feel free to send a note back right now to all of your friends back on campus that can't be here to make sure that they're experiencing this with you as well. It'll also be archived so that you can review these things later, and I'll try not to curse on the internet. So I usually like to start off at our national conference, and particularly this year, I think it's important, being our 10th anniversary, with the history of Student Veterans of America. Some of you may be familiar with it, but our roots are so very important, and I'm going to share our history so that we all might know it. On January 11th, 2008, a handful of student veterans, much like yourselves, founded Student Veterans of America. This coming week, SVA will turn 10 years old. And what a 10 years it has been. But the real story of SVA starts just a few years before that, in 2006, when student veterans were returning home from Iraq and Afghanistan on something called the Montgomery GI Bill. A quick show of hands from the audience. How many people have used the Montgomery GI Bill? Still some of us. It's how I did the majority of my education as well. Student veterans at the time were saying, well, hey, this Montgomery GI Bill, it's pretty good, but perhaps there could be a better way. And the model to understand how we could improve educational opportunities for a new generation of warriors was to look back on history, specifically the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, the original GI Bill of Rights. And that's how we welcomed home quite literally 49%, nearly half, of all returning World War II veterans as they came home from fighting in Europe and the Pacific. In the United States prior to 1944, unless you were a white male with a college-educated set of parents, there was a pretty slim chance that you'd earn a post-secondary degree in this country. The GI Bill changed all that. For veterans, absolutely, but for all Americans. The original GI Bill quite literally democratized higher education for us all. Fast forward to 2006, student veterans started talking to one another across the country via social media. And for the first time in the history and in the story of veterans, we were a generation that was no longer displaced by geography. We weren't separated from each other because our founding chapters at the University of Wisconsin, the University of Michigan, and Columbia University in New York started finding each other and were able to connect on this thing called MySpace. Is anyone in the room still friends with Tom? So here's what I love about our history. We are today, and have always been, a group of veterans focused on solving problems. That's exactly what student veterans do, and that's what they did in 2006. They found a couple of senators by the name of Jim Webb and Chuck Hagel, both of them Vietnam veterans themselves. And should anyone think that only officers can come up with good ideas, one was commissioned and one was an NCO. They organized a grassroots effort and a movement to help pass what at the time was being called the new GI Bill. We now know it as the post-9/11 GI Bill. After the bill's passage, we brought student veterans together in January of 2008 in the snowy suburbs of Chicago for our first Student Veterans of America National Conference, where we passed a resolution uniting our first 20 independent student veteran organizations on as many college and university campuses into one, Student Veterans of America. Today, I'm proud to announce that we just reached 1,500 chapters in all 50 states and 4 countries overseas, representing nearly 700,000 of the 1.1 million veterans who are currently in college. And you might not know this, but SVA is the largest chapter-based student organization in the United States by nearly 1,000 chapters. It's a lot to be proud of, and it's because we are living proof that if anyone ever looks at you and says college is not for veterans, or that we might not belong there, they are wrong. In addition to programs and services, SVA offers our members extensive national advocacy with government affairs and with institutions of higher education. There's already been some discussion of this the past day. And I'm sure everyone was excited to see the Forever GI Bill pass Congress unanimously. Let me show you something that I think is pretty cool. I had to look for it. I'm a little nervous not to lose it. So I want to show you this pen. This is the pen that the President of the United States signed Forever GI Bill into law on August 16th, 2017. It's your pen. This pen is incredibly important. It is a part of history, and it's your pen being housed at the national headquarters for you to come by and see it at any time. This is how change happens. This pen will be on display at the greatest legislation panel down on the campus, and it will be right next to the pen that FDR signed the original Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944. This is your pen, and I hope that you have the chance to see it. Nothing happens at our national headquarters or in your chapters throughout the United States without leadership. And leadership is really nothing more than taking care of our team. We are nothing without our teams, and you have one of the best working on your behalf at the national headquarters in DC. Many of you have come to the national headquarters to meet them, and many of you have seen them or hosted them to speak or attend your events on campuses nationwide. To that end, and throughout my remarks this morning, I'd like to ask at certain points members of our team to stand so that you may see them, and we may all recognize them for the work on our collective behalf. So really quickly, since I'm talking about advocacy, could I have our government affairs team stand with Will Hubbard, Tammy Barlett, Cassie Vanglo? Could you guys stand real quick and let's give them a round of applause. In particular, and if I could, I'd like to recognize Will Hubbard, the person who built the 60-plus organization coalition, pulled together 16 different bills, and mobilized dozens of lawmakers to help make the Forever GI Bill a reality. He's your Vice President of Government Affairs, and I'm proud to call him one of my closest friends and confidants. Others who worked with him recently joined our national headquarters staff this week. Lauren Augustine and Mark Smancy. Could we have them stand real quick for a round of applause and welcome aboard? It's important because they worked with us to build a grassroots strategy to get this done. And many of other organizations throughout the country, our partners, are here with us today. They're here because they know that student veteran leadership is important and that you matter. So I'd like to thank members of our Tiger team that helped make the Forever GI Bill law, with the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, Vietnam Veterans of America, the Military Order of the Purple Heart, Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, and others, including each and every one of you in this room today. Thank you for your collective effort to make this bill a reality and become the law of the land. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it, but if you ever tweeted or posted or spoke to some friends about the bill or in any way supported this effort, go ahead and stand up yourself. Don't be shy. Good work. Sorry, Mississippi State bow tie caught my eye, and I can't help myself. So it's remarkable. It's remarkable because we all came together to get something done, and not to mention that it's literally a $3.45 billion piece of legislation made up of dozens of provisions. You're welcome to go on to forevergibill.org to read all of them, where we've literally done a side-by-side comparison of the bill and layman's text so that you can share it widely with anyone that may have any questions as to how the bill might impact them or future generations of veterans. But this bill is literally the largest piece of education reform in nearly a decade, and it's because student veterans are succeeding in college. As such, I'm announcing that in addition to the implementation of the Forever GI Bill, this week we will work on the Reauthorization of Higher Education Act, securing undersecretary level representation at the Department of Veterans Affairs for economic opportunity programs, and a comprehensive overhaul of the Transition Assistance Program in partnership with the U.S. Department of Defense. Yeah, it was there. I don't, you can clap if you like. I'm an incredibly awkward public speaker, and I really need the adulate. No, I'm just kidding. But as your voice in our nation's capital, our team is working hard on your behalf each and every single day up on Capitol Hill, at the White House, and within federal departments and agencies. When you head back to campus, you should know that you're part of a national organization that is a leader in Washington and empowered to define the future of our country. The one thing that sets us apart is the ability to speak policy, if you will, while being fueled with data and research. This spring, we produced some groundbreaking research in partnership with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, dubbed the National Veteran Education Success Tracker, or NVEST for short. For the first time, we were able to directly compare student veteran post-secondary success with the overall post-secondary success of the student population and non-traditional student population nationwide. This research is all about outcomes and demonstrating the return on investment of student veterans. We served our country, and we earned an educational benefit. Even so, the taxpayers are rightfully asking themselves, what are we getting for the over $80 billion that we've spent on the GI Bill since 2008? Well, thanks to the brilliant Dr. Chris Cate and equally brilliant Miss Taylor Davis, your research department. And Chris and Taylor, could you stand to be recognized? Let's give them a round of applause. Thanks to their research, the first of its kind, we were able to study 854,000 individual records of every post-9/11 GI Bill user from 2009 to the middle of 2015. And we know that student veterans are quite literally the most successful students in higher education by any measure. We're more likely to attend a not-for-profit public or private university, over 82% of us. If you look at where we're going to school and the types of degrees we're achieving, this actually shocks many people. A bachelor's degree is the #1 degree earned on the GI Bill, followed by a master's degree, then an associate's degree, and then terminal degrees, such as a JD, an MD, or a PhD, and the like. The next thing is to look at where we are pursuing, or what we're pursuing academically, because there's a lot of myths and misconceptions out there about student veterans. Some people say, well, veterans don't really belong in higher education. Unfortunately, this misconception is so pervasive that many of us worry about it ourselves. Are we good enough to be in college? I know I asked myself this many times each time I was sitting during orientation in my academic journey. I'd ask myself the simple question, who was asleep in admissions the day they let me in? Am I good enough to be in this college? I'm sure many of you have asked the same question. I refer to it as imposter syndrome. And friends, let me tell you, the answer to those questions that you ask in your head is absolutely 100% yes. You do belong in higher education, and we have the data to put any myth or misconception about that we don't belong to bed once and for all. Our research shows that the top majors of our generation of student veterans in this order are business, science, technology, engineering, math, and health-related fields. arguably among the most competitive and academically rigorous degrees in the country. And if you compare the national GPA of all students at a 2.94, compare that with student veterans earning a national average GPA of 3.35, give yourselves a round of applause for that. Personal apologies at times for bringing that down a little bit, my bad. But if you compare that and compare us to our traditional student counterparts, you would be hard-pressed to find any group of students, veteran or otherwise, outperforming us at the national level. And student veterans succeed at higher rates than our peers, with a 72% success rate in college versus only a 66% success rate for those that have never served in the military. And we have a far higher graduation rate and success rate than non-traditional students who are also, like us, older, perhaps married, or have children and work full-time while we're in school. Today's generation, our generation, is not only among the most successful students, we even earn higher salaries than our civilian peers. Veterans with a bachelor's degree, on average, earn $17,000 more than our civilian peers. And those of us who possess advanced degrees earn nearly $30,000 more than our civilian peers. Student veterans are succeeding both in and outside of the classroom, and we know that investing in student veterans, whether as students or eventually as employees, it is the right thing to do. But more importantly, it's the smart thing to do. Student veterans are winners, and America invests in winners. That's why I'm announcing that this year, we are launching the Student Veteran Life Cycle Atlas, which will analyze key decision points in student veterans' educational life cycle. These decisions have a profound effect on our future. Last year, we partnered with the PwC Charitable Foundation to begin examining how different decisions impact the educational life cycle outcomes for student veterans. In 2018, we will share our initial results, which will further inform stakeholders, policymakers, and the public on the different paths and decisions that student veterans face as they pursue their post-secondary educational goals. Most importantly, we will provide future student veterans with an instrument to explore and evaluate different outcomes based on previous student veterans, your experiences. As a higher education nonprofit, our focus on data should come as no surprise to any in the room. In addition to a robust research, we introduced the Chapter Leader Academy as an interactive online webinar series to teach chapter leaders the skills required to be efficient chapter leaders. As our Chapter Leader Academy teaches student veterans on chapter skills, our Leadership Institute teaches 100 hand-selected leaders how to hone their individual leadership principles. This past October, senior leaders from government and industry joined us as mentors, hosted at the George W. Bush Presidential Center in support of our great partner in Prudential. As you know, President Bush, based on the video, is a huge supporter of student veterans. For 3 intense days, student veterans at the Leadership Institute focus on refining their personal leadership ethos and apply these principles to not only their chapter, but back home in their communities. This is the premier leadership training offered for student veterans in higher education. You are all encouraged to apply for the 2018 Leadership Institute when we launch the application this spring. This past year, we started our scholarship cycle by awarding 23 scholarships totaling more than $250,000 to student veterans, thanks to the generous support of our partners at Raytheon, Accenture, Google, and Union Bank. And we partnered with Google to bring over 800 student veterans to Google offices nationwide for one-on-one resume writing and tips from, of all people, Googlers. We partnered with Bank of America to offer the Chapter Grant Program to fund long-term sustainability strategies for our chapters. I'm proud to say that we awarded over $70,000 in grants to high-performing chapters across the country, with much more to come this year. Please do me a favor, if you have not applied for an SVA chapter grant yet, stop by the SVA booth on the campus to inquire how you can complete an application for an SVA chapter grant as soon as possible. Your programs team, and I'd like them to stand, Eric Gage and Karen Buck, they work tirelessly to deliver these chapters an incredible amount of value. Could we give a round of applause to Eric and Karen? All this work could not be made possible without the support of many dedicated partners. We've mentioned several already, and I'd like to highlight a few more who have made the amazing commitments for this coming year. Raytheon, for the second year, designated Student Veterans of America as the organization for their Young Employee Success Network, or YES Network, or YesNet, I apologize, for 2017. And thus far, they've raised $18,000 to date. This follows their $5 million grant to student veterans nationwide over the next 5 years. The Prudential Foundation is committed to a multi-year grant of more than $670,000 for the 2017 and 2018 SVA Leadership Institutes. LinkedIn, in collaboration with Microsoft, signed a $250,000 grant to train student veterans on how to use LinkedIn to expand your network and in the pursuit of your career goals. Has anyone requested me on LinkedIn yet? If you're not, request me on LinkedIn. This is a desperate plea. I'm just kidding. But seriously, request me on LinkedIn. Google and Apple are both here to support SVA and our work to make sure employers know not only who you are, but what you bring to the American workforce. Rockwell Collins and Google made it possible for some of you to attend here through the NatCon Lodging Assistance Program. And finally, PwC signed a $1.2 million research grant over 3 years from their charitable foundation to fund the Student Veteran Life Cycle Atlas. Absolutely incredible. Please give all of our partners a round of applause. And working with this team day in and day out and telling your story and your value that you bring to the country is some amazing dynamic duo of James Schmeling and Darren Phelps. If James and Darren could stand for recognition, I'd appreciate it. Thanks, guys. In addition to these generous support, these leaders in industries, we built a partnership with the National Association of State Workforce Agencies, or NASWA for short, and their Direct Employers Association to create and implement Student Veterans of America.jobs, which is a comprehensive database drawing from the National Labor Exchange with career listings. We've already used this with site partners, including Amazon, in their effort to recruit student veterans and alumni into their career and jobs. If you don't know Student Veterans of America.jobs, please check it out for full listings of jobs from companies that want to hire the educated generation of veterans. To empower all student veterans, it's important that we make sure everybody has the right tools to succeed. Over the past year, we've piloted a program that collects information about disability services on SVA chapter campuses, thanks to the amazing work of Dan Standage. You've probably seen him trying desperately to grow a beard and wearing a cowboy hat, but Dan Standage, please stand for a round of applause. Dan is our Director of Disability and Education, and he has been working to connect veterans with disability services in one way or another in a more meaningful way by normalizing the help-seeking behavior of veterans. SVA believes in the importance of community service, and our disability service liaisons are merely chapter leaders doing the same thing, service, but in the disability community. SVA raised $100,000 in funding from the Wounded Warrior Project to continue our work with the Disability Service Liaison Program, as well as alongside our partners at Paralyzed Veterans of America. And we've continued our collaboration with the Association of Higher Education and Disability and more than 750 college disability officials through the Veterans with Disabilities Collaborative. When we can work together and we work smarter, not harder, we can accomplish amazing things. I've already said that our office in Washington, D.C., your national headquarters, is in fact a place where we reserve space for any visiting student veteran that may need a place to get things done while they're in DC, or if you just want to say hello to your headquarters staff. So please come by our headquarters anytime that you're in DC, because it is your home in Washington, DC. We rely on your feedback and engagement to tell us what we can do better and to make the voice of student veterans heard nationwide. This ability to communicate is paramount. And we are so fortunate to have the story we get to tell because it is your story, the story of student veterans. Can I have our communications and chapter support teams please stand for recognition? And I'd like to call their names very quickly. With Barrett Bogue, Mark McKenna, Francesca Salazar, Bouchard, excuse me, Abdul Maega, Steve Nunez, and Calvin Jensen. You can see that that's our biggest team because that's the team supporting you every day. Ladies and gentlemen, these are the individuals behind the signatures in your inbox, specifically Barrett Bogue. If you love them, praise him. If you do not, please keep opening your emails. He's got a cool signature. I'm just teasing. As we chart the rest of 2018, I'm ever mindful that words matter. You may have seen my LinkedIn post from Wednesday titled, "We call them student veterans, and the distinction is important." We make the distinction between veteran students and student veterans. A veteran student is somebody who can't quite seem to get to graduation, a Van Wilder or Tommy Boy of sorts, who seems to be more inclined to be a student than becoming ultimately a graduate. Whereas inversely, a student veteran is somebody dedicated to pursuing a program of study in higher education who at one point or another wrote a blank check up to and including their life by joining the military in service to our nation. Remember, words matter. In closing, as student veterans, we are leaving things better than we find them. That's my charge to each and every single one of you in this room. When you return to your campuses and your communities nationwide, my charge for you is to leave everything that you see, everything that you touch, and everyone that you continue to lead better than you found them. The reason for this is really quite simple. We have a special statement on the back of our 10-year anniversary challenge coin, which is right here. And this statement speaks to this charge of leaving things better than we found them. Our country urgently needs every student veteran in this room to fill what I believe we are facing as a leadership deficit. You answered our nation's call to service, as Miguel mentioned, and once you proudly joined the finest and most lethal fighting force for freedom and democracy that the world has ever known. Your country needs your service again. Now, as veterans, and especially as educated veterans, America needs your leadership. Some attribute the following text to Thucydides, and others note that it's a paraphrase from a book written by Sir William Francis Butler from the late 1800s. The reality, either way, rings true today as it ever has, and the phrase goes like this: "The nation that makes a great distinction between its scholars and its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards and its fighting done by fools." This phrase served as the basis for our ethos at Student Veterans of America at the first SVA NatCon 10 years ago, when our first 20 SVA chapters met in Chicago. Our ethos today is as strong as it was then. Yesterday's warriors, today's scholars, and tomorrow's leaders. I hope you will each join me in celebrating Student Veterans of America's Founders Day, our Founders Day, on January 11th this year, when SVA will turn 10 years old. The next 10 years is up to all of us. It is your obligation to take command of what's to come and to together define our future. Friends, my name is Jared Lyon, and I'm humbled to be in your presence. I'm honored to be one of you, and I'm so humbled to be amongst you. I look forward to meeting as many of you as humanly possible. Please come up and introduce yourself to myself, to our staff, because we want to continue to hear your stories and support your incredible journey in higher education and your leadership in this country. Let's stay in touch. Let's keep connected. Let's keep the energy up. And when we return to campus, let's leave everything we touch and see far better than we found it. Thank you all so much for your attention this morning.